Hello, everyone. This is Gene Quinn here. Hopefully you can hear me now. Is that better? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yes. So it seems like we have the audio back and not exactly sure what happened there. Apologize for those technical difficulties. These are strange times, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about here in this webinar. And one of the things that probably a lot of you have started to figure out as you have attended more of these events over time is that we are really kind of pushing the limits on some of the technology that is out there. Not just us, but others. You hear about various things that are happening, and one of the things I think, I'll just riff for a minute while we let people rejoin and we get all of our speakers back here. I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a massive amount of innovation occur as the result of this, and that will move us forward in a lot of different directions. And I think we'll probably wind up seeing the economy and the workplaces look an awful lot different, because aside from some of the glitches like this that may cause us to reboot and restart and maybe as a more of a inconvenience, these types of events and this type of connectivity that folks have the ability to do from home, wherever they may be, is remarkable. And I think it'll wind up changing the economy, and there's a lot of very smart people innovating in a lot of different areas. Today, we're going to talk about the innovation that's going on in the biotech and pharmaceutical sector and the laws and policies that relate to them, and maybe some of the innovation that has not happened as a result of some policies and what maybe should be different, and how we can maybe participate in trying to make that different. So I see we have our speakers back. So let's kick off, and I'm sure we'll have other attendees to join us as we go through the day. We had about 950 people register, so thank you for joining us and spending a portion of your day with us today. What I'll do is I'd like to introduce the speakers, and let me share my screen here with you all so you can see them. And it looks like my screen is frozen. Hopefully you're still seeing me. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. So what we have here, let me push there. So now you see our speakers. There's all of our speakers. You have some of the speakers joining us via webcam here today. And what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll introduce the speakers in alphabetical order. First is Jeff Blumenfeld, and he's a partner and co-chair of the Antitrust and Trade Regulation Group at Lowenstein Sandler. He is an expert on FRAND and SEPs and also on patent pools. And Jeff has spoken at some of our live events. I think this is the first webinar he's joined us for. And when we sent out the announcement about what we were going to talk about, he emailed me and he says, there's a very interesting antitrust angle here that probably people need to be made aware of. And a lot of things are changing here, not to take his thunder away, but I think that will kind of surprise some people, and eyes will open as to the number of legal issues that are going to be coming up as a result of cooperation and just dealing with this pandemic. We also have Oren Hershkowitz joining us here today. Oren is Senior Vice President of Intellectual Property and Technology Transfer at Columbia University, and he is a professor there in both the business school and in the engineering school as well. And he'll be talking to us about what's going on in universities. We have Phil Johnson, and Phil has been a good friend of ours for a number of years and has joined us. And I think this, Phil, may be your first webinar as well, though you've been with us in a number of our live events. And Phil is probably needs no introduction. He's been a litigator for a full career before he went to Johnson & Johnson, and was probably the preeminent patent, not probably, was the preeminent patent litigator in the country prior to joining Johnson & Johnson, and then rose to become Senior Vice President of IP Policy and Strategy. Along the way was Chief Patent Counsel and was Chief IP Counsel, and he's been involved in pretty much every major industry organization and is a member of the IP Hall of Fame. And Dave Kapos, another person who does not need any introduction, is here with us today. And Dave is a partner at Cravath, and he is also a former Undersecretary of Commerce and Director of the Patent Office. Dave was also Vice President in charge of IBM's intellectual property portfolio while he was there. We have Gaby Longsworth, who is a director at Stern Kessler, and she is going to provide us with a lot of the science background and conversation that we need to have here today, because this is her particular scientific area of expertise in the biotech and chemical area where she practices. And she's going to talk to us specifically later on today about what it is that the patent office may be able to do, but she will also be contributing a lot of the scientific discussion that I frankly just don't have the chops to do as an electrical engineer. On the phone is Judge Michelle. Judge Michelle, as you all know, is a former chief judge of the Federal Circuit, and after spending a generation on the court, decided to step down rather than take senior status so he could pontificate and lead the charge for better, stronger patent rights. And those of you who are not in the DC area, I can tell you Judge Michelle is everywhere. He's on Capitol Hill, he's at all the various meetings, he's at all the think tanks, and he really is an ambassador for the IP system. We have James Main, who is Vice President of Science and Regulatory Advocacy at Pharma, and he's going to be telling us today about what it is that the industry is doing with respect to research and development. And he has a PhD in toxicology and pharmacology as well, and he'll be contributing on the science aspect as well today. Me, I don't need an introduction. You probably know who I am. And then last but not least is Rob Stern, and Rob is the founding director of Stern Kessler, which is one of the largest IP law firms in the world, and he has been on everybody's trailblazer list over the years, and we're happy to have Rob with us. So thank you all for joining us today. And as I got off to a bit of a rocky start, there was one thing I normally do at the very beginning, which is to thank our sponsor, because without having sponsors, it just doesn't make it possible to bring these types of webinar series to you, certainly not for free. So our sponsor here today is PatentSite, and PatentSite is a LexisNexis company, and they have some really excellent research available, deep dive looks at what's going on in various portfolios. We've got a few slides about what's going on in the antiviral space that we will share with you at some point during the webinar today. But if you really need to know what's going on in portfolio with portfolio analysis, to give PatentSite a try. You can do a demo there, a free demo. They'll walk you through it. They'll answer any of the questions that you need answered. So thank you to LexisNexis and to PatentSite for sponsoring this. And then the last piece of housekeeping is your control panel. Those of you who are listening on GoToWebinar on your computer, you'll see a control panel, and there's handout tab where you can download the slide deck. And right next to the handout tab is also a questions tab, where if you'd like to send in questions, I'll be moderating the questions and weaving them in as we go along. So, longer intro than I had planned, but here we are, and we're at the slide where I want to bring all of our panel in for the first time. And this is the ambitious agenda that we have today. You've probably all seen it. You've probably all read various parts of it. It's been on the registration text. It's been in the emails that have been promoting the event. So we don't necessarily have to go through it specifically. But what I would like to do is I would like to go, and we might as well just go in alphabetical order again, if that's okay with you guys, to get everybody's preliminary thoughts. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but what is it that each of you would like the audience to have in mind as we approach this topic of innovation relating to COVID? Jeff, let's start with you.
Thanks, Gene. This is Jeff Blumenfeld. Well, I hate to start off by saying contrary to one of the bullet points, but contrary to the bullet point about antitrust on this slide, what I wanted to talk about today is the ways in which antitrust can adapt and has already adapted to COVID-19 and the extent to which antitrust permits collaboration, even among competitors, where there is a public interest, a consumer benefit that flows from that collaboration, and how the antitrust agencies in the US have adapted to COVID-19, even in terms of their process and timing, to allow for more rapid approval of collaborations that are necessary. There are obviously limits on it. You can get into trouble in a collaboration with spillover effects between what's permitted and what's not permitted. But the good news is that collaborations that do address the public interest will be permitted and are being permitted already.
Okay, good. And we'll have more on that. Oren, are you with us here?
Yes, I am, although I'm audio only and can't seem to log onto the application. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, so we sit at the very beginning of the font of innovation, I think, in the sense that universities are often working on basic research fueled by sort of the interest in pushing the boundaries of science, and that's great. I think in times of crisis, it's not surprising that necessity is the mother of invention, and in many ways, what I'll talk about during my talk is the impact that we're seeing. So in times like this, when, especially in places like New York and at a university with an affiliated hospital system, we are really up at the front lines of this crisis. And watching the level of passion and innovation and energy that is inspired in the research faculty, but also the graduate students, the undergrads, alumni, the staff on campus has been truly astonishing. We are in some ways drowning in the kind of innovation that's coming out, and it's forced us to adapt all of our processes and all of our ways of thinking about the world to address it. The last time we in New York encountered something like this was probably 9/11. But in that kind of a crisis is really not much. The scientists were sort of sidelined. That wasn't the main purpose. But this is all about science. This is all about innovation. This is all about finding new ways to get personal protective equipment and diagnostics, therapeutics, medical devices into the hands of patients and hospital care providers as quickly as possible without any of the BS that often gets in the way. And it's forced sort of a radical rethinking of the way we're doing essentially everything. So it's very exciting times. I wish it were for a better reason.
Yeah. Phil, your preliminary thoughts.
Well, I echo a lot of what's already been said. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, but what you start with are the tools and technology that have been developed before the necessity arrives. And those tools exist to a great extent, much more than in past generations, but they still are not to the point where we could respond as quickly as we all would like with the kinds of vaccines, therapeutics, and other needed drugs like immunomodulators to protect and treat this dreaded virus. Now, there are a lot of reasons that we are as far as we are, and there are a lot of people that a broad medical industry and universities and others who've moved us forward a lot. But unfortunately, there have been areas where our public policy simply has not valued things that we need right now. And one of those is medical diagnostics. And we can talk about the many ways that medical diagnostics have not been valued. But if they had been, I think we would be in much better shape right now. And we can talk about why and what we ought to do about that, because this is not the last pandemic or threat that we're going to face. And we should think about not only how to get through this one, but what to do in the future.
Yeah, and that's going to be a focus of what we're going to talk about, particularly in the second half of the event here today, is policies that went wrong and what policies maybe we can try and advocate to look with an eye towards the future. Dave, and that's something I think that you're probably going to talk about specifically, and I know it's something that you have talked about quite a lot and more forcefully over the years, is innovation and the need for strong innovation.
Yeah, Gene, thanks. And as I step back and think about this, the first thing that comes to mind is that, we're in a crisis, quite frankly, because as a country, we're not very good at thinking or planning for the long term. We just have totally failed to do that. Doubly unfortunate, the patent system, our innovation engine, is all about thinking and planning for the long term. It's about being willing to put up with paying higher prices and potentially having less choice in the short term. And this goes back to the, unfortunate problems with an antitrust system that's run amok, in favor of long-term innovation, which is dynamic competition brought on by the patent system. So, Gene, we've got a crisis because we're not good at planning for the long term. We've got a patent system that we've wrecked and disabled from helping to incent long-term innovation by making diagnostics unpatentable. We've got an antitrust system that's completely confused about preferring static innovation over dynamic innovation. And we should expect to have few diagnostics in the future. Of course, Oren and the folks at Columbia and other universities will help to solve the current crisis. But as Phil pointed out, this is not the last crisis. There will be a next crisis. And I think current course and speed, we should plan on being unprepared for it because we've deprived ourselves of the tools for preparation, and we've put in place a system that favors the here, the now, and the today over the long term.
Yeah, and there's a lot there we're going to talk about specifically. My just initial thoughts on that point that I'd like people to think about is the World Health Organization has a list of over 400 essential medicines, and 98% of those were patented at one point in time. And now they're freely available for a variety of different illnesses. And that's the forward-looking patent system that we used to have.
Right.
And hopefully this crisis will wake people up. I think this is a shot across the bow, and it's hard to talk about luck or good news in this type of situation when people we know and care are sick and people we know are dying. But we've been predicting this type of pandemic, the scientists have, for a very long time, and it happened. And it's not as bad in terms of the mortality rate as it could be, but the next one very well may be. And we're not going in a path right now, and we'll talk more about that, where we can feel like we're going to be prepared, I'm afraid. Gaby, your thoughts on this matter?
Yeah, thanks, Gene. Piggybacking a little bit on what Dave just said, it seems that the US tends to be very reactive rather than proactive in certain ways. For example, the beginning of January, China released the sequence of the coronavirus genome. And within a matter of days, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, Saudi Arabia, countries that had been through SARS and MERS before, had PCR tests ready to go. I mean, you need the tests at the beginning of the epidemic or the outbreak. At this point, after it spread so far across the globe, it's almost a little too late because you haven't had a chance to separate infected people, and isolate them and contain the spread. So we're sort of beyond that point now. But even beyond just this pandemic and everything we're dealing with right now, what about the downstream effects of this pandemic? What about our antibiotic drug supply? I've read reports that more than 80%, as high as 97% of our antibiotics come from India and China. If they are affected by the pandemic and they're not able to produce these antibiotics, we don't have any backup systems. We are not producing them in the US anymore because of the costs, the manufacturing costs, which relates back to generics and Hatch-Waxman and a lot of other issues. So without, of course, going into all that detail, I think the thing is to now think about the downstream issues that we might face because of this pandemic that we're just simply not prepared for.
Yeah. Yeah, and that brings up medical supply chain issues and all that. Judge Michelle, your thoughts?
Well, Gene, it seems to me the problem is being prepared. We weren't prepared for this pandemic or prior ones either. If we stay on the current course, we won't be prepared for the next one or many other challenges as well. And it seems to me that one of the roots, maybe the main root of the problem, is that the courts have failed to understand how the larger patent system works. The courts have treated patent eligibility and patent validity issues as if they were philosophical or religious issues based on dogma and things written 150 years ago by some judge or justice. So in my view, the courts have done the society a disservice by failing to understand the real world and incentivizing investment, and they've turned out to be very poor policymakers. So we need to change that, or we're going to continue to have problems. And I think the solution is to inform and educate the courts through amicus briefs from people who are in the real world with real industry, real clients, real science, real economics, because that's where the blind spots of the judiciary seem to be hurting us so badly.
Yeah, it's and that is something I know that you've been working on quite a lot, and hopefully you can tell us a little bit more about that as it goes on. But and I know we just published your article that you do think the Federal Circuit can respond to this, and so we can hope for sure. Jim, your thoughts here. Jim, I think you're, are you muted?
You hear me okay now, Gene?
Yep, gotcha.
Okay, great. You know, when it comes to antimicrobial resistance and preparing for a viral epidemic, we like to think about the world of preparedness as an ecosystem, and that ecosystem has many players, many contributors in it, each with their own role to play. And what we've really been proud of at Pharma is the response of the pharmaceutical industry component of that ecosystem. While there may have been delays in policy and in moving forward with the coordinated response, the pharmaceutical industry, academic researchers, and other partners in that ecosystem were hard at work, taking that sequence of the viral genome to determine where it might be most readily attacked by a vaccine. They were at work going through their libraries of both existing and untested medicines and compounds to see where there may be opportunities for treatments for the COVID-19 disease. And here we are, a little over a month from the entry of the first vaccine into clinical testing. We now have approximately over 300 clinical trials ongoing worldwide for treatments, for therapeutic approaches to treating COVID-19, about 100 different medicines being evaluated. There's over 60 different vaccines in various stages of development, including 7 that have reached clinical testing. So that's all because there was this reservoir of expertise, a reservoir of capability, and a reservoir of capacity that existed in the research and development ecosystem. And all I can say is thank God.
Yes, no doubt. Thank goodness. Now, Rob, your initial thoughts.
So one of the things that I do is I write a weekly sort of e-newsletter, which many of you get. And if you'd like to get it, just please send me an email and we'll put you on the list. It's free, you can unsubscribe. But the purpose for the newsletter is to look at what's going on in terms of innovation and IP globally. And when COVID hit, Davey and I were right out in front with a special issue of the newsletter Focus 2020. And we were describing the technology issues because for us who are not schooled in this technology space, but who are IP experts, we need to know the basic technology issues well. And the global approach that we use with the newsletter allowed me to talk to people all over the world in law firms and in corporations and in government agencies and the like to find out how everyone was dealing with this lockdown situation. Was it stopping innovation? Was it preventing a cure? What was really happening on the battlefield as it's been described by some? And what we found was that universities like Columbia, particularly Orrin Herskovits, were doing amazing, amazing things. And it really heartened me as a member of a law firm that's in total lockdown, as many of law firms are, that we had this massive amount of innovation, not just in the United States research institutes and universities, but around the globe. And we saw a post on LinkedIn by Orrin about a week ago Sunday. Paul Michel and I got on this with Gaby. We brought Jean in, and now we have this webinar. So this is very heartening for me that we're all getting together to talk about this most critical issue.
Yeah, and it really is a very critical issue for a lot of different reasons. My hope is there will be some hope, and my hope is that there will be some pessimism come out of this webinar. Hope on the side that the scientists are hard at work in doing what we expect them and hope that they would do, and unfortunate pessimism on the side that, well, maybe the policymakers are not doing as much as they could do. But this may change. This may change, and we all need to stay informed. Because as I think this, Phil, you mentioned yesterday when we were having one of our conversations, nobody knows what people on the Hill are thinking because nobody's going to the Hill. Nobody really knows exactly what the judges are thinking. But these are people, they're people too, they're affected by this as well. So this could become a pivotal moment all around, which it hadn't had to come to this, but we are here now. And with that kind of an introduction, I think, Orrin, why don't we kick it to you to tell us about your article, the one that Rob mentioned, and what's going on at Columbia and other institutions.
Happy to, and apologies for not being able to do this via video. As just everything else going on weren't bad enough. We lost power in the storm yesterday and don't have it back yet. So limping along here with my cell phone. We'll do what we can. So Jean, if I'm assuming, I'm just going to talk through the slides. The first one is the one that starts with New York City hospitals PPE crisis. I can't see which slide you're on.
Yep, that's the one that's up.
Okay, great. So this all started, I'm going to tell the story of how this felt from Columbia's perspective, but really this is not a story about Columbia. This is a story about institutions across the country and around the world. And I think I think that was Rob who said that. It's really been remarkable. This is just a little snapshot of what one institution's experience was. I do think we are out perhaps ahead of our peers on this because of the need in New York. But this is now unfortunately going to be something that everyone from New Orleans and Detroit and California and everywhere across the country is now. This is not a uniquely New York story. So basically, in March 19th, there was an article in the Times that essentially said that the New York City hospitals are at war with no ammo, that the supply chain was fundamentally broken, and that because of that, the doctors couldn't get their hands on the personal protective equipment they needed. Not only the protective equipment, but there were no nasal swabs. We're literally getting calls from hospitals saying, we have no nasal swabs. We have no thermometers. Can anyone make HEPA filters? It felt crazy. And so the engineering school, before we got involved, the engineering school was already in touch with them, as were others around Columbia. So the middle panel there, the first thing that happened was actually the librarians at Columbia had access to 3D printers because we have a makerspace in our university undergraduate library. So The campus was shut, so they loaded the printers into their cars, drove them to their kitchens, and set up a sort of a small army of people doing 3D printing from designs they found on the internet to supply the hospitals in the near term. But meanwhile, the engineering school really geared up and partnered with clinicians at the medical center and started trying to figure out how they could make these work. And they realized that when you talk to the hospitals in New York, these face shields, which are the designs you see, the hospitals need something like 50,000 of these per day. So at that scale, and that's per hospital. So that's over 2,000 patient clinicians interactions per hour. So it's pretty clear that it's nice to start these in the quantities of hundreds or thousands, but unless you can meet that demand, people are going to die based on this inaction. So the engineering school really sprang into action, realized they need to find a design that could be made using traditional tool and die manufacturing techniques. They need to take less than 1 second per manufacture of these things. They wouldn't be perfect, but they'd be a start. So within a day, they had designed a few different designs that could be flat printed using traditional contract manufacturing techniques. They called our office and we got involved, worked together to help find contract manufacturers in the New York region and in California who could make these. Ended up negotiating with them to try and get the price down, so it was something that the hospitals could do. Very quickly set up click licensing sites to distribute the designs as widely as possible, but while still maintaining some liability protection, hopefully, for Columbia. Our general counsel's office, Melissa Cohen, and our GC's office was unbelievably flexible and understanding because she really saw the patient need right up front. We did file patents, partially because my office is the patent office for Columbia, so we know how to do that. But also because we realized in this case, these designs may have utility once the crisis passed. So the decision was made very quickly to give these away, to give the designs away for free and allow hospitals and individuals and community groups to manufacture them for free during the time of the crisis, but while preserving the possibility of using the patent to ensure that there is an active supply chain with a commercial distributor who can take this off our hands once this crisis passes. And in fact, we are now in discussions with one of the country's largest medical supply distributors about picking this up. So the good news is in 7 days from first iteration, we now had over 2 million of these either in use or in production for New York City and regional hospitals. These designs are now in use in Europe, in Thailand, in Morocco, and in dozens of hospitals around the world. And so it's been incredibly gratifying. It's just at a pace that we are not used to dealing with. I think universities typically, from our perspective, when we get lucky, 5% or 10% of our innovations will make a real difference in people's lives 8 to 15 years from now. And here we went from, in 7 days, we achieved that impact. So if you go to the next slide, the challenge is that's just one example. So that was great, and we all felt very proud of that, and we're happy to be able to make a difference. But that's just one of the projects going on at the universities. The cool thing is this has been, as I mentioned, an explosion of creativity. Partially, it's faculty-driven, responding to trying to be helpful and using their, using the hammers they have to attack this nail. And so you see some of the, but some of this is institutional. Columbia, to its credit, from the president and the provost and the deans of research and the department chairs on down, put together fora around the university to try and incentivize this kind of creativity and harness these innovations. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that we've had, just in the last month, we're now tracking 50 new COVID-related innovations just across Columbia. And actually, I'll send around a link to that if you're interested, because we're tracking these in real time. Some of them are personal protective equipment, but a lot of them are new therapeutics or diagnostics or medical devices that could have a lasting impact on this disease and others. And we have a light bulb that's already been licensed to a company that uses far UVC technologies to kill viruses and bacteria on surfaces without harming humans. We have fast qPCR devices that do rapid diagnostics. We have therapeutics. So it's a very, very exciting time. But this is not just Columbia. So Rob, I very much appreciate your credit to us. I want to make it clear, we happen to be the ones on the phone but this is happening at 150 institutions around the country. Yesterday I did a seminar on this for our peers across the country. We had a couple of hundred universities logged on to learn how to do this. And we, Duke, University of Minnesota, and Partners Healthcare were on the phone. And if you go to the next slide, our industry rag is called Tech Transfer Tactics. This is just this week's top stories and it's all COVID-related innovations that are getting to market. Gene and Rob asked me to very briefly talk about what's different about this. So this is good from my perspective. I'll stop here for a moment. This is amazing news for the country in this very dark time, because it's this kind of innovation that, when given enough support and when given the proper infrastructure, can really make a difference in the world this year, next year, and in the 10 years ahead. But it requires a lot of flexibility. So we found, as patent people, we found our jobs turned on their heads. We spent most of our time doing bureaucracy busting, uncomfortable decisions about regulatory and liability and distribution questions. A lot of working the Rolodex to figure out who we know and how to get in touch with them. So you can see on the right, just a ton of things that we don't normally know how to do. Like, we don't spend a ton of time working with the city, state, and federal task force on COVID. We don't typically interact directly with the NIH and the CDC. We don't typically get involved in manufacturing and distributions questions. So this is all new for us and something we could only do because of the rich community of people that we could tap into to learn from their mistakes and their best practices. And Rob and Judge Michelle were particularly interested, I think, in industry's role. It has been so heartwarming to see the outpouring of proactive outreach from industry, just asking how they can help. We got a call from Con Ed saying they would love to use some of their manufacturing capability to start producing PPE for the New York region hospitals. We've been working with Microsoft. They've got a task force looking at how they can help with COVID, so we've been connecting them to our researchers. I should have put IBM on here. I'm sorry. IBM actually put together some new drug discovery tools and released them open source on the internet for universities. So our researchers are now partnering with IBM to try and identify new drug targets. Takeda, ExxonMobil, Hitachi Chemicals have all been phenomenal in offering up their supply chains to try and create the material to get this done. So it has been unprecedented, and these are often, some of these companies we work with productively all the time. Sometimes, as many of you know, it's a little bit of a tense relationship. Innovators and patent generators don't always have the easiest relationship with some of the tech companies in particular. So it has been very gratifying to see everyone putting all that aside and just realizing, we're on the front lines of a war, or in our case, I guess we're on the supply chain for the front line of the war. And in wartime, you just can't worry about all this stuff. You just got to get stuff done and put all those differences aside. I think that's it. Gene, I'll stop. I don't think you're doing questions later, not now. Is that right?
We'll do questions as they come in and also later. So if anybody does have questions, please feel free to shoot me questions. I'm getting mostly comments, like, for example, William said that the White House briefing always thanks the first responders, but maybe perhaps what we really should be doing is giving thanks to the scientific researchers as well. And I think that's certainly true, because they are on a very different front line in this battle. And that actually maybe is a good transition to Jim, what you want to talk about as well, because while Oren sees all this stuff at the university level and labs are humming, and that's an important thing, is universities are closed, but the COVID related labs at universities are open and working. But pharma and biotech companies are really been very active, right, Jim? Can you give us
Absolutely
an update of what's going on there with your membership?
Absolutely, and echoing the comments from Oren and others, the industry has really been in a very active engagement mode, reaching out to institution-based and medical center-based researchers and clinicians to both do the technology transfer necessary to move a good idea into a development program, but also to really get these clinical studies running at light speed. And we've set a number of land speed records in the past couple of months, bringing vaccines and treatments online and getting clinical studies started. And again, that speaks to the power of this ecosystem. Like any ecosystem, though, it has its fragile points, and it does need to be taken care of for it to thrive. And I think one of the learnings that we'll have coming out the other end of this crisis is there is an ecosystem. It's able to respond, but it needs some care and feeding. It needs support, and it needs to be optimized so that it can really thrive at times like this. The productivity of the industry in response to this has been nothing but staggering to me. In fact, I'm a over 30-year veteran of the pharmaceutical industry and doing drug development, and I've never seen anything like this. I spent an hour and change yesterday on the phone with all of the heads of research and development, global heads of research and development of 30 or so of the largest pharmaceutical companies on the planet. Not one question about should we worry about sharing information, or do we have to stay in a competitive mind frame, or how are we going to cover costs? Every single comment in the discussion, every single piece of energy was devoted towards how do we work together collectively in a more efficient, more productive, and faster manner to beat this challenge as quickly and effectively as we can. So very inspirational. I've got a ton of numbers on how much is being done, what types of vaccines, what types of treatment approaches are being considered, but I'll hold those for more specific questions.
So we do have a question from Troy. It comes up in response to what Oren was saying, but I think it bears on what's going on in the industry as well. If we have 150 universities across the country doing this, are they coordinating on any level, or is it are they going parallel paths?
Sure.
And that also will get us a little bit into the next topic, what Jeff is going to talk about. But as I understand it, Jim and Oren, and maybe Gaby, you mentioned this the other day as well. The answer is yes, they're parallel paths, and yes, there's coordination, because sometimes we're going to need more than one vaccine, for example. Jim, can you lead us off there with that discussion?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'm sitting here looking at the Takeda logo on screen, and it reminds that for plasma therapy approaches, Takeda and a number of other entities, both academic and industrial, have been spontaneously come together into a consortium that is already going forward and running to try and be efficient about the way we access and manage access to plasma that can potentially be used as a bridge therapeutic between the time we have targeted treatments for COVID disease and targeted vaccines for prevention of the disease.
Go ahead, Oren.
So on the university front, I would say it is halfway being coordinated. So there's a lot of efforts. There are a lot of cross-university task forces that have popped up around specific topics. I think initially in the first week or two, it was very much university by university. Then there started to be some coordination amongst across universities, not enforced, but voluntary. So that people working on face shields started to form groups to share designs for face shields, for ventilators, for swabs. On the more traditional, actually my big concern there is there has not been a coordinated effort yet that we are aware of across the hospitals around the country to say what they need. So I'm a little bit afraid that over time we're going to find, all the universities, all U.S. engineers at the universities working on solutions to problems that no one has anymore. It's once the industry supply chain kicks back in again. On the broader topic, though, about things that are not needed, things that are needed but are not realistically going to happen today or tomorrow, but things like therapeutics or diagnostics or vaccines or medical devices. These things are always let a thousand flowers bloom at the university level. Everyone's working on this. You might have different people working on a similar idea with different perspectives. The great thing about the patent system is that it has a process for clearing through who was the original innovators and to sort of differentiate what your ideas are versus someone else's ideas. And eventually the venture capitalists and the industry partners we work with will pick the best of breed solutions and move them forward. So there's definitely not an effort right now to say, you go forward with your therapeutic, we'll stop working on ours. Everyone's trying to push them. Everyone's trying to work with industry and venture capital to figure out what's going to work the best and to let that innovation flower and let the market decide eventually what wins.
Yeah, and Gaby, there's also what the science says is going to win too, right? I mean, we've got, I think you had sent that article around to us. There's by some counts maybe over 100 different vaccines or vaccine candidates or teams working on vaccines, and there's not likely going to be a single vaccine that we need, right?
Exactly. It appears there's over 115 vaccine candidates that are being considered. I think about 30 or so are actively being investigated. And the hope is that we will have more than one vaccine, because it's very unlikely that one vaccine will apply to all populations all across the world. So the ideal scenario is to have 2 to 3 to 4 vaccines, different types of vaccines, whether they're RNA-based, protease inhibitors, or whatever they may be, to attack different parts of the virus. And to have that all across the globe, and also having manufacturing facilities all across the globe, because you can imagine with the world's population being over 7 billion, that is a lot of manufacturing, and it's complicated manufacturing. Each factory can take 2 to 3 years to build. So, I know we're all hoping that we're going to have a vaccine, but the reality is, the earliest it's going to be a year and a half before we have actual capability and haven't manufactured enough doses to even distribute. And so the other thing that's part of this is having platform technology, where we have the basic backbones of, say, vectors or whatever it may be, so that when the next outbreak happens, whether it's a mutated coronavirus or whether it's a new one, that we have the platform technology to step off of to get a vaccine starting from scratch all over again.
Yeah. Now, Phil, you during our prep call yesterday had an interesting way to talk about the timing of all of this, right? And we hear that universities and pharma and biotech and all the science is moving very, very fast. But to a lot of us who are in lockdown, it doesn't feel fast.
Well, that's because you're not familiar with how much faster it is than it used to be. It wasn't 20 years ago, if you talked about developing a vaccine in less than 10 years, people would think it wasn't credible. And now we're talking, as she just mentioned, about having a vaccine next year. We may be able to get some vaccine candidates for emergency use as early as the beginning of 2021. So that would be a 1-year cycle, and some are in clinical testing already. But you have to think about what's involved even now. You started in January, was the first time you really knew that this disease existed, and the first time that you got a sequence for it. So what people did, and there are a number of different efforts going on, but in order to produce an immune response, you need an antigen, and what's on the surface or is likely what's on the surface of COVID-19. So at that point, immediately in January, before there was a public health response, people were beginning to look at existing platforms and existing approaches to try to get those portions of the COVID virus that might produce the antigen response you need for immunity, and started putting them into things like, as was mentioned, existing platforms. I know, I mean, it's all public knowledge at this point, which is great. J&J went to using an adenovirus platform, which it had developed because it did a lot of work and is doing a lot of work on Ebola and Zika and other viruses that we aren't seen as big problems here. But then they use that platform to begin to look for candidates, and you have to produce multiple candidates using the platform and eventually test them to the point where you select one. And that was all done in the first quarter of the year. And they are now moving into 2 different phases. One, working on identifying and undertaking clinical testing, because you're giving vaccines to otherwise healthy people. They have to be safe. So you have to start your safety testing. But the other thing which is different, and I think the whole industry is doing this, is you're looking to the manufacturing capacity. And normally you would wait till you had a proven vaccine and worry about whatever your existing capacity was or the scale up. But we're going to need billions of doses of this vaccine, whatever vaccine works, or whatever vaccines work, and it may well be more than one, it may be several, and we're going to need the manufacturing capability for that. And fortunately, we've now advanced light years ahead of where we used to be in making vaccines. And Bard and J&J are investing to build out the necessary manufacturing facilities so that they could have as many as 1 billion doses of a successful vaccine by 2021, which is going to be necessary. And if, as I think was mentioned yesterday when we were talking, I would say those with the capability to produce vaccines are not going to sit with idle capacity if their vaccine is not the one that works out. If their capacity can be repurposed to produce somebody else's vaccine in order to get enough doses, that's clearly going to be done. And at this point, all of this effort, at least as far as I know on J&J's part, and I assume on others, is being done with a not-for-profit objective, getting the costs down so that people can afford to provide the vaccine and they're not looking at this as a profit opportunity. I think the entire industry is looking as the emergency it is, and it's their turn to step up to do anything they can to really save mankind.
Yeah. Now, what we're looking at here, I just pushed the slide. This is not a vaccine portfolio strength, but this is the antiviral strength. We did a webinar with Patent Site about 10 days ago. And if you're interested in this, we talked about the antiviral landscape throughout the entire webinar. But this gives you an idea of the companies that are working in that space. Johnson & Johnson is at the top, Gilead, Roche, and then we also have this, which is another way that Patent Site shows what you want to be on this scale is as high as possible and as far to the right as possible. And nobody ever winds up being at the very top right corner there, where you have a huge portfolio with everything in the portfolio is extremely strong. But you see Johnson & Johnson's got the biggest portfolio, and it's a very, very strong portfolio working on antivirals, and so does Gilead has a big one, and Roche does too. And these are big companies that are coming at this from a variety of different angles. So Phil and Gaby and others, we've been talking about vaccines, but don't forget there's this antiviral, there's a component as well. And there's a lot of research going on all at the same time. And, you know, Jeff, this maybe tees you up here. You know, we're talking about collaboration. Phil just put on the table that the manufacturers and the companies are likely going to be manufacturing vaccines that they didn't create in order to deliver to the public the level that we need. This level of cooperation I can't recall ever seeing it. And, you know, it's good to hear that the DOJ is thinking about these antitrust issues, but antitrust is not an area of law that you normally think of as flexible. At least I don't. So maybe we can start that conversation. So you want to take it away here? Hold on, let me,
Are you talking to me or Jeff?
Jeff.
There we go. Okay, that's good. Thank you, Gene. Yeah, and let me say before I start, with respect to the comments that Dave made early on, I completely agree that antitrust has taken a seriously wrong turn in its view of patents, and particularly in its view of patent enforcement. I spend most of my professional life working with innovators and therefore patent owners, and particularly in various collaborations in terms of joint development and joint research and standard setting and patent pooling. And so I agree that the antitrust division in particular has taken a really bad turn here that is hurting the patent system and hurting innovators. What I want to talk about today, though, is collaboration. And here the story is much better. So when we're looking at this, we have to acknowledge that antitrust has recognized for decades that collaborations among market participants, even among competitors, can be pro-competitive. For example, and we'll get to this slide in a minute. For example, buying groups, which allow small companies to aggregate their purchasing power to achieve the kind of discounts that big companies get, have been recognized as pro-competitive for 50 years. They provide benefits to consumers, allowing for a greater variety of products and at lower prices. 25 years ago, the FTC issued guidelines for collaboration in healthcare based on the decades of law and policy development that had gone on before that. And 20 years ago, the DOJ and FTC issued more general guidelines for collaboration among competitors, again, building on and aggregating the developments that had occurred over the years. So collaboration, even among competitors, is not seen as inherently or necessarily contrary to antitrust law, because it most often is, and can certainly always be, pro-competitive. But antitrust has a concern because it also recognizes that collaborations, obviously not of the kind we're talking about here, but in general, that competitors working together can wind up producing anti-competitive benefits by reducing competition between them with little or no offsetting benefits to consumers, or in some cases having results directly contrary to the interests of consumers. For instance, collaborations on reducing output in order to raise price. But the good news is that collaborations are analyzed under the rule of reason in antitrust, which is particularly helpful in this context, because it means that the analysis takes account of all relevant factual, economic, scientific information about the market in which the collaboration occurs, the purpose of the collaboration, the participants in the collaboration, and of course the likely effects, pro or anti-competitive. This is a very intense but very case-by-case analysis. It is not a one-size-fits-all rigid set of black letter rules. So obviously coronavirus and the resulting COVID-19 disease have created a new normal. But at the same time, we have to recognize that while antitrust will recognize and allow collaborations that are pro-competitive and, more importantly, pro-public interest, antitrust does not shelter in place during a pandemic. So companies still need to be thoughtful about their collaboration. So how will antitrust deal with this? The first thing always that you want to look at is there a general antitrust exemption during this period of time? The answer for that is no. The CARES Act, which, as you know, was passed recently to deal with a broad variety of issues here, specifically does not provide any antitrust exemption or modification of standards for how antitrust applies during this period of time. Second, keep in mind that collaborations among entities at different levels of a supply chain inherently raise less antitrust concerns than collaborations among competitors, and are almost always pro-competitive and almost always approved. Third, whether a particular collaboration is likely to pass antitrust muster, that is, a determination about what the level of risk is, that determination is ordinarily made quickly and relatively easily by the party's own antitrust counsel, whether in-house counsel or outside counsel or both. There's no mystery to this analysis. It happens every day, and I perform this kind of function, as do many others, on a daily basis for my clients. Fourth, on March 24th, and this is the slide that you have in front of you, the DOJ and FTC responded to the coronavirus threat by providing some general guidance for joint activity that would almost always be okay, that is not something they'd have concerns about. And they did this by reference to their prior published guidance. And for the audience, all of the items that are mentioned on this slide and others that I'm referring to are provided, I've provided links for them so that you can read the source material. So first of all, the agencies have stated that when firms collaborate on research development, that's generally regarded as an efficiency enhancing integration of economic activity and is typically pro-competitive and almost always approved. Secondly, the agencies have said that sharing technical know-how as opposed to and different from company-specific data about prices, wages, outputs, may be necessary to achieve the pro-competitive benefits of certain collaborations and would not be an antitrust issue. The agencies have also explained that absent some kind of extraordinary circumstances, they will not challenge providers' development of suggested practice parameters, for instance, standards for patient management developed to assist providers in clinical decision-making that also may provide useful information to patients, providers, and purchasers. They also explained that most joint purchasing arrangements among healthcare providers, such as those designed to increase the efficiency of procurement, reduce transaction costs, do not raise antitrust concerns and are unlikely to be challenged. And finally, of course, the antitrust laws generally permit private lobbying addressed to the use of federal agency authority during this emergency, including private industry joint meetings with the federal government to discuss strategies for responding to the COVID-19 threats. Insofar as those activities are focused on soliciting government action. Now, that last one also is an opportunity to highlight where the risk is. So this is a long explanation of areas where collaboration is almost certain to be not challenged. Because remember, you don't need antitrust approval to do something. You just need a self-assessment of the risk of the collaboration. And the advantage here is that this guidance is fairly broad and gives a broad idea of the agency's views. But buried in that last one is a however. And the however is a real risk for companies collaborating. And that is, as long as they're operating within the parameters of what is okay, they're fine. But what often happens, and we hope will not happen during this period of time because everyone's focus is on the public interest, what often happens is that the opportunity of getting together gives the collaborators both the platform and the opportunity to talk about other issues that may be anti-competitive outside the parameters of the appropriate cooperation. And that's where companies collaborating really have to be careful. For instance, not sharing competitively sensitive company-specific data about prices, wages, outputs, capacity, or cost, even though they're collaborating on a big project. So finally, for those situations where collaborators are concerned that they would like to have some heads up about what the antitrust agencies would say about their collaboration, the Antitrust Division has long had a process called the Business Review Letter to allow parties to get a view from the agency on how the agency would review a proposed collaboration. There are two problems with the Business Review Letter approach in an age of coronavirus. The first is the FTC, which has primary enforcement authority or normally takes the lead in enforcement in several critical areas, including pharmaceuticals and healthcare, has no similar process or has had no similar process for advance approval. The second is the Antitrust Division, which does have this Business Review Letter process. That process normally takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months or more, which is obviously a non-starter in the situation we find ourselves in now. Fortunately, both agencies have solved both of those problems, and they announced in a joint statement on March 24th, a link is provided for that as well, in which they promised, first of all, that the FTC would institute a process of advanced review, and secondly, that with respect to proposals addressing public health and safety, they would respond within 7 days. The good news is there's already been one approved, and the agencies met their self-imposed deadline. There was an affirmative business review letter approval given to FEMA's Project Airbridge to a number of medical supply distributors who are going to be working with FEMA on the Project Airbridge, which is intended to accelerate the manufacturing, sourcing, and distribution of personal protective equipment and other coronavirus treatment-related medication and necessities. The parties were McKesson, Owens and Minor, Cardinal Health, Medline, and Henry Schein. The proposal was submitted March 30th, and by April 4th, the companies had approval to move ahead. Now, it is important also to look at why this got such rapid approval. The rationale for the approval was based primarily on the fact that the federal government itself, including its agencies, are not subject to the antitrust laws. It's a sovereignty issue. And courts have extended that basic immunity to conduct by private parties, where the private parties are acting either individually or collectively in a way that is compelled by agreement with a federal agency or by a clearly defined government policy, and where the agency actually supervises the conduct. So here, the parties will be acting under agreements with the federal government, namely FEMA as the coordinating agency. Second, FEMA and its agents will be actively directing and supervising their conduct, and any determinations of prices, wages, output, quality, bids, or allocation will only occur if FEMA actually directs such conduct. Put another way, the collaborative activity will occur not only at the direction of, but in the presence of FEMA, Health and Human Services, and other entities and their agents. In other words, the government agencies will actually sit in on the collaboration sessions. In addition, the parties had proposed various safeguards which helped them get quick approval. They agreed that the collaborations would not be used to increase prices or reduce output or quality or quantity. They agreed that exchanges of information that are necessary will be made by each party with the government rather than by the parties directly with each other, so that the government determines what information is shared. They agreed the collaboration would end promptly when the emergency ends. And they also agreed that any competitively sensitive information that they did acquire about each other during this period of collaboration will be sequestered, meaning locked away within each company and not used in any way going forward. Like any business review letter, though, the department always ends by saying, this is our current enforcement intention based on what you told us, meaning, so if you actually do something different, don't count on this letter. And it reflects the outcome they noted of an expedited temporary review procedure, necessarily less thorough than ordinary. So they may have missed something, and if so, they reserve the right to come back at you. And finally, they said the letter, of course, only applies to this specific proposal. So all of that's a long way of saying that based on what we know now, the department is saying, we would not pursue enforcement against you, but that depends on you sticking to the rules. So the bottom line is that collaborations can and will occur. The vast majority of them will not require any kind of advanced antitrust approval. The kind that Oren was describing, for instance, can be determined and have, I'm sure, been determined by the entity's own lawyers as being perfectly okay and not raising competition issues. But it is important during these collaborations to stick to the public interest and health and safety purposes of the collaboration and not stray off into discussions of competitively sensitive information that could get companies into trouble.
Yeah, you know, and that's the thing. If you do it right, and that's always the case with antitrust issues, if you do it right, you're fine. We do have a question here that goes towards this, I think, although not specifically on the antitrust side of it, but do you think, and this is probably maybe for Jim and Oren specifically, do you think that this type of cooperation is likely to carry forward even after the COVID crisis passes? And I think it's more from a scientific point, because that question came in right before Jeff was talking, although there certainly obviously is the underlying issue about this cooperation where the government seems to be almost, in my words, looking the other way right now and saying, let's solve this problem. Don't do anything stupid. Don't talk about prices or anything that's a per se problem. And we're going to be fine. But as this unfolds, there could be an awful lot of synergies that people see and want to continue down this path. And that's probably going to require some level of congressional action, I suppose. But the first thing is there likely to be an appetite for that? Jim, Oren, what do you think?
I can jump in on that from the sort of, so this COVID crisis is awful. Obviously, it's awful, and it's unprecedented during sort of this generation's lifetime. On the other hand, there have been awful diseases that existed before this. When this is over, people will still unfortunately get cancer, and there'll still be pediatric leukemia, and there'll still be spinal muscular atrophy, and there'll still be torn ACLs. And so my sense is we have always had a great spirit of cooperation with many, many companies, both, I know, J&J, certainly one of them, Pfizer, Merck, Medtronic, Sumitomo Pharma, Boston Biomedical, Celgene, et cetera, in both out of altruism, and I think also because there are places where economic interests align of getting a product to market. There are other companies where the economic interests don't necessarily align, and so this is more based on altruism and trying to do the right thing in a crisis. And only time will tell whether how long that spirit of altruism lasts. We certainly hope it does, because it's unbelievable when you have, we work very, very closely with IBM, for instance, on a whole bunch of initiatives, both before the crisis, during the crisis, and I'm sure after the crisis. We co-run the blockchain accelerator with them, where we have tons of joint research projects, and it's been a very, very fruitful relationship, which I'm sure will continue. So I think the answer to that is where economic interests align, no doubt, and where they don't align is probably going to be based on relationships and who's running those companies. And I hope for the best.
Yeah, Jim, your thoughts? Oh, can't hear you.
Yeah, I keep getting muted by the operator. I agree with all of those statements, and I do believe that there is a new realization in the value of these sharing and cooperative relationships. I think they will extend beyond vaccines and treatments for coronavirus, simply because they're valuable. And we've seen examples of this in the so-called non-proprietary space, pre-competitive space over the years. I think that's going to expand. Part of the discussion I've been having very recently with leadership of these large pharmaceutical R&D organizations is exactly around this. How do we better share the information, the knowledge that we have, so that everybody can move faster? And it is in spirit a very magnanimous concept, but it's also a great way for a rising tide to raise all boats. So I do expect to see more of this. I do expect to see agreements forming around the sharing of information and data, and taking advantage of the informatic tools that we have available to do it in a more effective and a more rapid way.
Yeah. Now, Judge Michel, before we transition into the next segment here and talk more about the law and regulation and policy, I thought maybe give you an opportunity to give your thoughts on what you've heard so far and any reactions that you have.
Well, it's of course in the nature of courts' decisions being based on precedent for courts to be focused in a backward-looking viewpoint. The problem is that tends to mean judges are quite unaware of recent and current developments, and certainly unaware of trends that would allow you to make some rational predictions about future realities, whether it's in a marketplace or in science or in other areas. So it would be great if 9 justices and 18 federal circuit judges and 1,000 federal trial judges were all listening to this seminar because they would learn a lot about the current scene and some projections going forward. My guess is that none of them are listening to this very thoughtful set of presentations, and they should. And so I'm hoping that one thing that we can do going forward is to figure out mechanisms to better inform and educate the courts about the practical realities of the ecosystem and of the patent system more particularly, because they really need it. Things change fast, and depending on dicta from ancient cases is not necessarily the best way to advance society's goals.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts there, and one question. I don't think that there are any judges on the webinar. I could be wrong. There may be some clerks on the webinar. I haven't gone through the list. What I will say, though, however, is I learned yesterday or a couple days ago that the one webinar that Rob, you and I did with Judge Rader when we talked about China and Chinese policies and laws, and recently we had representatives from several regional governments from China on that webinar. So, it does speak in some level, I'm sighing, hopefully you can hear that, because it seems like sometimes I think our government is not as in tune to these issues as they ought to be, and the governments around the world, they are, and they want to inform themselves, and they want to know what we're thinking and how they might better prepare themselves and understand the intellectual property world. The question I have for you, Judge Michelle, and maybe you can't answer it, or maybe you could just internalize it. As a judge, when you see this pandemic going on, does it change the way you think about the issues? And the reason I bring that up is, we talk about a lot of these things need congressional action, and where's Congress on 101 and that sort of thing we're going to talk about moving forward. But as per your article that we published earlier this week, the Federal Circuit could suddenly change their mind. There's nothing, I think, in the Mayo case or in the Alice case that is draconian as some of the district courts have read into it, and some of the panels at the Federal Circuit have read into it. Is it conceivable that they will view things differently as we move forward? I mean, because they are people like we are. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my basic hope and approach and advocacy would be for judges to be more informed about the real world as opposed to the world of prior opinion and statements therein, whether holding or dicta. And because of the universality, the ubiquity of the coronavirus problem, no judge in America is unaware of this. So this is a very good jumpstart on helping judges get better informed and see the interaction between decisions they make and practical consequences in people's lives relating to cures, vaccines, diagnostic tests, protective equipment, and all the rest. So this may be the sort of shock to the system that will change viewpoints in the judiciary, and I certainly hope so, but I think that over and above the headline and news reading that judges will engage in, that the profession, the science part and the patent lawyer part and the business part can start peppering the courts with amicus briefs that will inform them of these realities, because otherwise there's just such a danger that they will continue to be making decisions blind to the practical consequences.
Yeah, and that is important. And that's probably a different webinar for a different day, but we see that the forces that have been active in trying to weaken the patent system have had no shortage of amicus filings, and they obviously think it works, and we who very carefully watch the court and read the opinions and know what's in the amicus briefs, know that they have an impact. So hopefully others will internalize that and act accordingly. Now, Dave, maybe that's a good transition to bring you in here, because I know you want to talk about innovation policy generally, and I'll just let you take it away, and you can go in any direction you want to go in. If you want to respond to anything that's come up so far, you can feel free to do that first, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. So, just riffing as you've been doing a bit, I was listening to the first part of the discussion, and on the one hand, feeling very good about the response of the university community and companies working together. It's sort of the best of the American spirit and American innovation and cooperation. On the other hand, I was thinking about the role the intellectual property system is playing in this, and the metaphor that was coming to mind is the good old one that you hear in situations like this: lead, follow, or get out of the way.
Yeah.
And about the only role the intellectual property system is playing right now that I can think of is to get out of the way. Maybe that's the right role in case of an emergency like this, because collective action and selflessness and all the things that were really aptly mentioned are needed. And so maybe it's the right thing that, as I think Oren mentioned, or someone else, companies are putting their intellectual property up for free, so to speak, or open sourcing it at this point, and making their intellectual property available without the requirement to pay any remuneration. But I just wonder what the long-term prospects are for the intellectual property system in these kinds of situations. If we're going to manage pandemics by emergency action rather than proactivity, it seems like it's hard to envision what role the IP system will play. So that's the first thought that's coming to mind. The other thought, again, just riffing at this point.
No, go ahead, please.
Yes, I was listening to the first part, and again, very encouraged by what I'm hearing in terms of the collaboration, but I'm also hearing about needs to share information and share data and share plans and share libraries and platforms and all of that. And I'm juxtaposing that against the basic precepts of the intellectual property system, which is a system that was founded in a whole different era on the basis of exclusion, of giving ownership interests to individual parties and permitting them to exclude others. So it's a system that's premised not really on cooperation and sharing, but on exclusion. Now, of course, we all know that we overlay contracts on top of the IP system, and whether they're open source agreements or bilateral agreements or standards or whatever, and we enable parties to share in intellectual property. But it's increasingly feeling to me like there are some reasons why we are struggling so much to make the intellectual property system fit within these new paradigms. It's a square peg and a round hole problem with a system made for exclusion that we're trying to create inclusion based on it. So those are.
Gene, could I respond to or add to?
Go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
Those two comments. I would say the intellectual property system is vital to attracting the long-term investment in capital that provides you the foundation, the tools, weapons, whatever you want to call them, that you can use in an emergency. And that includes university labs and startups and many other companies. If you look at who is responding to the emergency, these are people who by and large rely on the intellectual property system and have in order to be there. So if you're about to go into a war, it helps to have an army when you start. And you don't develop an army overnight, and you don't develop the weaponry you need overnight, and so on.
Yeah. I would, this is Oren again, I would agree. And David, I think it's a really important point you mentioned. I just want to make it clear, the universities, this is not suddenly a land of let's give everything away for free and hope for the best. We think of, you know, when I talk on to groups that are primarily patent people, patents are an incredibly important tool of what we do. So of the 400 or so innovations that get reported every year to our office at Columbia, we file 200 some odd patents based on those. And we probably maintain another, you know, 2/3 of those. But there are innovations where patenting doesn't, you know, our goal is not to file patents. Our goal is to get innovations into the market where they make a difference in people's lives. And in some cases, that's done by giving them away. And in some cases, that's done with copyrights. In some cases, that's done with patents, but not patenting all over the world, but just nationally. It really depends on what kind of capital is going to be required to bring that technology to market and how much risk that's going to be entailed. And so we still, you know, when we're putting together a therapeutic or a diagnostic or a medical device, without rock solid patents, we're never going to be able to track the risk capital we need from the venture industry or from biopharma to take that on and bring it through the, you know, 8 to 15 years of clinical trials and the hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to take. So it's more about picking up the right tool for the job and not trying to use the wrong tool in the wrong instance.
Well, and I'd like to just respond to Dave's second point about information. I understand what you're saying about it being about exclusion, but the patent system was founded with the idea that we should share information and has been a tremendous engine for sharing information. And I worry more and more about, with a lack of patentability in some of the subject matter areas, that companies are going to decide to keep things like their new diagnostic secret and say, send me your blood sample and I'll tell you whether this person has X or Y, because they're not going to be able to profit from it otherwise. So I understand the point of exclusion, Dave, that you're making, which I think is a good one. Maybe this isn't the time you should be going out. It absolutely isn't the time to go out and get injunctions or try to get injunctions against people. But I do think the patent system has been a great source of information sharing over the years.
Yeah, so Gene, that takes me to the main point that I was going to make, which is, you know, that I just don't get how Oren is going to be able to take the next method of diagnosing a fetal characteristics based on paternally inherited CFF DNA found in a mother's bloodstream and convince any biopharma company to invest anything in it, because that was the subject of the Arioso and Sequenom patent that, of course, was found invalid and you know, marked a major part of an entire area of biopharma research being excluded from the patent system. Nor do I think that Oren's going to have much hope convincing the Cleveland Clinic that that a method for assessing the risk of a patient to cardiovascular disease, another diagnostic, is worth pursuing in the marketplace, because that was the Cleveland Clinic's innovation that was patented, and the patents were all invalidated also under Section 101. Nor do I see much hope for you know, anyone on this call getting a biopharma company interested in a method of diagnosing patients suffering from myasthenia gravis, because that was the subject of yet another patent that was found to be invalid under Section 101. So Gene, my main point is to say that in the long run, it's fine, you know, we're in an emergency mode and everyone's got to be selfless and cooperate. But I guarantee you, after this is over, the CEOs of these companies are going to be going back to their boards of directors and their shareholders, right? And there's a reason why companies are quickly adopting these poison pills to try and prevent activist activities against them, because they can see coming a day not so far from now when shareholder profits are going to be reasserted, and there's going to be no desire to plan for the long term, because the long term depends on a functional patent system. And in this area, diagnostics, we no longer have a functional patent system. So this is why I started off saying, and I'll repeat it now, we ought to plan on having fewer diagnostics in an era when we need more diagnostics. We ought to plan on treating the next pandemic in another emergency mode after whatever hundreds of thousands of people die and however many trillions of dollars of the economy are trashed, rather than doing anything about any of this on a long-term or proactive basis, because we've got no legal system in the US anymore that supports this. And then the last comment I'll make, Gene, just coming back to China, is that unlike the US, the Chinese do, because all of those innovations that I just mentioned are patentable in China. And for those who follow the statistics, they would know that, you know, not only is China like way outdistancing the US on patent protection. In fact, the US use of our patent system, Phil, dropped by 1.6% last year. Had it not been for the 9% increase in applications coming from China, the use of the US patent system would have dropped 2.2% last year. So while Europe went up 3%, WIPO's going up significantly, China's going up significantly. It's only Chinese filings in the USPTO that are stopping the US patent system from cratering even quicker than it is. And then meanwhile, China has already, this isn't like, look out, it's going to happen in the future. These are all things that have already happened, right? We're already toast. The Chinese, in fact, have already overtaken the US as the preferred country of origin for clinical trials. Now, there's probably plenty of reasons why that's the case, but I'll tell you, one of them has got to be because our patent system is unavailable for the protection of many important biopharma related innovations.
So, Rob, with respect to China, I think, which has come up here a couple times, and I know this is an issue that you have written about and you follow quite a bit. Do you have a sense of what's going on in China at the moment?
Yeah, and this is based on talking to Chinese counsel. There's a massive level of innovation going on in every aspect of medical technology. And the government, of course, encourages small entities to be very involved with their patent system. A large percentage of their filings are done by small entities and individuals and universities. And there's a deep appreciation for the need to file on patents, both utility patents and utility model patents. And this is going to be very significant in the long term when you consider how much is manufactured in China, because these patents are going to come back and be used against companies that are manufacturing in China and trying to export what they manufacture in China. So I think we need to be concerned about the lack of attention that the US industry plays to what's going on in China in terms of their patent system. And also understand that a lot of these patents are going to be used to control manufacturing, and global supply chains need to be aware of this, because as we've seen in this pandemic, global supply chains have failed in many, many respects. So going back to Phil's comment about the next pandemic, and also to David's comment about the next pandemic, we need to step back from this crisis when we get a chance and evaluate, you know, what the long-term approach that the US should be taking.
So, Dave, I know that's something that you've talked about a lot, and when you were at the patent office, you were a very strong advocate of a strong patent system and strong national innovation policy. Do you have a sense of what it is that you think our innovation policy ought to look like moving forward in order to change the future that you see? Because I know what you were saying is if things, at least what I was hearing is if things remain unchanged, America, world, get used to fewer medical diagnostics. Get used to less of the type of medical innovations that we really want to have, less of the pharmaceutical type stuff that we really want to have, that sort of thing. What needs to change in your mind to make that no longer the reality?
Well, Gene, I would start with simply Section 101 needs to be fixed, and patentability, patent eligibility needs to be restored for the entire field of diagnostics, and in fact, for all biopharma related innovation very, very broadly. I would essentially go back and reverse the whole set of Supreme Court decisions that have in total so hobbled the applicability of our patent system to these critical areas of innovation. And that includes, in addition to biopharma on the software side, when artificial intelligence isn't patentable and quantum computing software isn't patentable, and 5G related innovation isn't patentable in the US, which it now isn't, you got a big problem on your hands, because those are three areas that have been deemed critical to national security and are clearly critical to national competitiveness. And again, they're all patentable, they're all eligible for patent protection in China and in Europe. So I would say the starting point is to fix Section 101. I would say that the second thing that needs to happen is we need to have better appreciation for the risks and contributions that are taken by those who contribute quality innovation to standards, innovation-based standards. I mean, standards like 5G as an example. And those parties who contribute quality innovation need to be championed as heroes and not persecuted as violators of any group of laws around the world. So I see standards-based innovation as being the ecosystem and value creator of the 21st century, and a model that should be celebrated and its contributors celebrated much more than they have been in the most recent generation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I'm looking at one of the comments we got a little bit earlier, Jim, or Jeff rather, when you were talking. It kind of fits with what you were saying, Dave. They brought up from Jim brought up the FTC versus Qualcomm case, and it came in when you were talking about the rule of reason and that sort of thing. And the comment just very simply says the rule of reason analysis doesn't guarantee patents are treated correctly. Just witness FTC versus Qualcomm, and I think we fundamentally, I think we are not the problem in my mind, but collectively, policymakers don't have a real respect or understanding of patents. I mean, I hear, where you're talking about, Phil, Dave, you guys are talking about exclusivity, non-exclusivity. Let's remember why we have exclusivity. We have exclusivity. The premise is, if I own the rights and I can prevent you, very creative, intelligent person, from engaging in my rights, well, you usually don't take your ball and go home. You're going to go and you're going to innovate and you're going to try and do things differently, and then we get into this arms race of innovation. That's the whole point. And you can't have an arms race for innovation when you have weak rights. What you have is a system where everybody shares and shares alike, and copying and open source. And I'm not saying open source is evil. Open source can play an important role. As Arne was talking about, the magnitude of the investment necessary to protect versus how much it's worth and that sort of thing. But if you don't have exclusive rights, you're going to constantly live in a world where everybody's borrowing, which is another word for stealing. And I mean, that's a riff. I'm getting on my soapbox. I know I'm preaching to this choir here, but before we get into start going back and forth too awful much, Gaby, there was one thing that we definitely wanted to talk about, to throw out on the table. Let me share this with everybody. This is something that you worked on that Dave was talking about longer term, this is what we need to do, 101 and that sort of thing. But there's also a lot of people that are asking the question, well, our company doesn't have enough money to pay the fees right now because our market is eroded. And these are a list of things that you and I worked on, but primarily you and your partners at Stern Kessler came up with. Can you tell us some of these ideas and why they might help?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of this is real world stuff. This is stuff that we're dealing with patent practitioners on a daily basis. We can't get a hold of inventors to sign declarations. We can't get a hold of some clients. They are in the hospital. They're just not available. And the PTO has come down with one extension in particular. So there's PTAB related due date extensions that are available that obviously I'm not going to go into in the interest of time. But then there's prosecution and trademark related due date extensions that are available, but they're limited. So for example, if there's an action or there's a fee that needs to be paid between March 27th and April 30th, then the PTO will allow a 30-day extension. With a waiver, you have to certify basically that practitioner, the applicant, patent owner, inventor was not available due to office closures or cash flow interruptions or travel delays, personal family illness, etc. But it's only 30 days. So I think the PTO can do more. And some of these ideas are laid out here. So one is, for example, we can take extensions of time, but it's going to cost the client who's already having issues in this pandemic, and we're going to lose PTA. So can the PTO, this number 5, no reduction in PTA under certain circumstances for COVID-related delays. What about IDS fees and issue fees? What about accelerated examination of COVID-related patent applications, just like Brazil has done and some other countries? In China, there's an accelerated trademark pathway that we don't have yet. So there's a lot of things that the PTO can do, and maybe they will still do them, but right now we are very limited. And there's a lot of fees that are stacking up that is going to be very difficult for clients to pay, obviously. And for
what I would say is, we're trying to create this list. I've actually communicated with the patent office on some of these that I put on the list. If you have ideas, send them to us, because Gaby and I, we're going to work on this article and we're going to put this out there and see how much of it flies, because some of these ideas should be not very difficult. I mean, coronavirus ombudsman, I mean, that can happen this afternoon.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Gene, Gaby, this is Dave. These are great ideas. Couple of things that come to mind for me is, as to number 2, remember, back when I was at the office, we did that, and we did that for, of course, this is way before COVID-19. We did it for green tech, and I believe it was the first time the office had created a specific program to accelerate a category of patent applications. It was terrifically popular and well received. So the office, they've got the statutory authority to do that. The other thing that's interesting that's worth mentioning.
Some of these may require congressional action. Certainly, extending statutory deadlines, that's not something the patent office can do.
Yeah,
it's a good idea.
Number two, they have the right to do. But Gene, let me go on. There's one other thing that they could do, they don't have the right to do, but this is something that was widely called for. If you remember the accelerator program for inventions that involve humanity, I think it was called the Patents for Humanity program, which the PTO still runs. Congressional approval or legislation is needed to make those acceleration certificates tradable, to make them into a quasi-security in effect. If you do that, they become enormously valuable, because then other companies that have needs can use them. So Gaby, that's when I could see that this is resonating with you. I would definitely add to the list that the PTO, should be going out and seeking congressional approval to be able to create a tradable certificate program, so that folks like Oren can get these things and they have significant value then in a marketplace.
Has anyone suggested doing something to relieve the burden of IPRs from small inventors and small businesses who may be involved in them at this point or facing them at this point? I would think it would be very difficult for them, since they're strapped financially and otherwise, to fairly go forward or be asked to fairly go forward with those.
This is Rob.
That's a good idea, Rob.
Yeah, we had Scott McEwen and I did a webinar yesterday on all the things that the PTAB is doing. But Phil, this has not been considered that I'm aware of. And I urge everyone to voice their support for such a program as someone who focuses a lot on patent owner side of PTAB, because I'm not hearing anything from the office on that point.
And one thing to add, my partner Tracy Durkin reminded me and us that a lot of these great ideas are only possible if Congress, appropriates the $1 billion in fees that were brought in fees, but can't use for certain operations. So without access to that money, it's going to be difficult for the office to provide some of these, accommodations that are mentioned.
I mean,
yeah, Dave, could you speak to that? I mean, I know that the fees and the budget for the PTO is always an issue, and we kind of have a PTO that is self-funding right now, and they sort of, in this crazy Washington way, have access to the money that they bring in, but all at the same time don't have access to it.
Yeah, so the office has been successful in recent years in getting access to the fees that they brought in, not on a permanent basis that's guaranteed from year to year, but on a year-by-year basis. And they, of course, now have the reserve fund, which they've been able to put money into in order to be able to weather some of the shutdowns that have occurred in recent years. So I agree, Gaby, that it's the economic issue is always something that needs to be watched and Congress needs to help with. The good news, though, on this one is that in recent years, I think the PTO has been successful in navigating that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well,
but they can't actually access that reserve fund unless Congress gives them the authority. Is that correct?
Right. There are statutory limits on what they could do. But again, the Congress has been helpful in that regard. And in recent years, the system that we set up in the AIA, I think has worked fine economically.
Yeah.
The director has broad discretion.
The clock, and probably want to go towards the wrap up. Phil, I want to give you some time to talk about stuff that might be going on the Hill, or your thoughts on that. And Judge Michelle, I want to give you time to kind of give us a perspective. So we're going to run a little bit long due to the technical difficulties I had at the beginning. But Phil, go ahead and tell us what's going on in DC, what's likely to go on in DC. Are things going to change? I mean, I know it's kind of looking into a crystal ball, but what do you anticipate?
Well, I don't think much is going on, if anything in DC right now, unless it's directly COVID related, and it's probably not IP related. The IP activity that was going on before everything kind of stopped going was trademark and copyright, because I think the staffers involved had kind of given up hope that they could get the support necessary to get a bill through Congress with the number of votes it would be necessary in their mind to pass things like a fix for the subject matter eligibility. Now, whether that changes or not, we'll see, but it won't change soon, because I don't think we're going to be coming out of this in Washington as a practical matter, maybe until after the elections, from the standpoint of Congress, since they are going to have to worry about how they're going to do a campaign and everything else. I just don't see the appetite to dig in. I wish it weren't true, but I'm afraid that's where we are. which doesn't mean it's not important to continue to do the writing and talking and other discussion that we're having here and that we should have in the future. But I just don't see that translating to more than education of those who will be involved in future activities, of which there's a crying need.
Mm-hmm. That's unfortunate, I suppose, but I mean, all at the same time to probably be expected. We did have a question here. I thought that Phil, you might be able to give us an answer to this. Somebody asked a while back is, at what point in time do you suppose we may wind up having a vaccine realistically? I mean, are we talking 6 months, 12 months, 2 years? I know we've talked about this being lightning speed compared to what it normally is in terms of development, but what is the current thinking?
Well, I think Moderna thinks that if their RNA vaccine is successful, they might have some for use on an emergency basis in the third quarter of this year. But I think that they would say, and the others who are also working very hard on vaccines would say that it's going to be into 2021 before we really get substantial amounts of vaccine available. There was a news story that came through when we were on this saying that J&J thinks that it could make 900 million doses of vaccine available by the end of the first quarter of 2021. But they'd be the first to say that's assuming everything goes right. So I think
Right.
we're really talking through mid 2021 to late 2021 before you could get widespread vaccination. But I think you'll have vaccinations available for frontline healthcare workers probably sooner than that, and some other settings. But remember, that's only one part of what we're talking about. You also have a huge amount of effort going into screening existing compounds and existing therapeutics, which could be much quicker. Yesterday, there was some preliminary positive indications about one antiviral. I think it was Devesivir or something like that, Darunavir maybe. But there are lots of other possible agents that could help. And then another part of this people overlook is that one of the people die is because in the end stages of this disease, they have an overactive immune response. Not all patients, but some of the patients. And so work is being done on immunomodulators that might be provided to like ratchet back the immune system, because it could be the overreaction of the immune system that's actually causing the fatalities. And we have a lot of immune modulators already. And so as physicians figure out how to use them, we could see the fatality rate go down before we really have an answer to the problem.
Yeah, we're seeing that. I would say we found the same thing at Columbia, that there's certainly therapeutics that are being designed around this challenge, but then there's existing startups that are portfolio that are saying, hey, Applied Therapeutics may have something in cardiomyopathy that was already underway, and who knows? It's early days, but there are drugs that are already moving along the chain that have already either are entering clinical trials or in clinical trials that may turn out to have efficacy on parts of this, either from a cardio or pulmonary, or some part of it to lessen or resolve some of the symptoms, whether it's the cytokine storm that Phil was talking about or something else. But so there's some stuff that is really far out, and there's some stuff that's closer, and obviously the vaccine would be best of all.
So, Judge, you've been sitting here listening to us talk about this for a while now, and I'd like to really get your perspective on what all this means, whether it's science related, legal related, legislation related. Do you have thoughts?
Well, I agree with the projection that Congress is not very likely to do anything this year and maybe not next year. And even beyond that, it's hard to predict and hard to engineer a congressional fix to eligibility or injunctions or anything else. People are working on it, and we need to work on it like crazy, and ongoing efforts. And unfortunately, they've been sabotaged by a very small number of very rich, powerful, angry, aggressive companies who want to preserve the status quo for reasons of their own budget convenience. So it's hard to see Congress coming to the rescue. And in terms of the Federal Circuit, they have 30 patent cases every month, some from the IPRs at the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, and some from the examination process, and then, of course, many cases from the District Court and the International Trade Commission. So every month, the Federal Circuit has the opportunity to clarify and reconcile the case law and the doctrine. And in my opinion, despite having that ongoing open opportunity, they just aren't doing it. And really, the Federal Circuit, it doesn't look to me anymore like one court. It looks like 5 different courts, and it all depends which panel you get. And so rather than promoting more uniformity, clarity, certainty, consistency, the Federal Circuit recently, in my view, has been moving us in the opposite direction. But I am sure that the judges are very hardworking, very smart, very knowledgeable about the law, and that they can be persuaded to do better, particularly if they begin to open their eyes to the domestic practical economic impacts on investment, for example, which is flagging in many areas. Because the incentive that the patents used to provide has been so weakened. And I'm sure that most Federal Circuit judges are not even aware of these enfeebling impacts. And secondly, I don't think they're aware that every time they change invalidity doctrine and keep moving the goal line, they defeat the credibility and reliability of patents. So lots of people are giving up on patents and either not innovating as much or resulting in relying on trade secrets. And then finally, the Federal Circuit, as far as I can tell, is utterly unaware of the global scene in terms of markets and products and supply chains, but also just even in terms of direct comparisons. It's been noted by earlier speakers that all these diagnostics that are not eligible here are eligible throughout Europe and in most Asian jurisdictions, particularly China. And it's the same thing with injunctions, routinely available in Germany and England and many other countries in Europe, and routinely available in China, not routinely available here. I think the Federal Circuit judges need to be educated about how we are destroying our global competitiveness by being so out of step with what other major jurisdictions and markets are doing. And I don't think any of this is intentional. I think that it's just a lack of perspective and knowledge. They're too isolated, and they need to be made aware of reality.
Yeah. Too isolated, I think, is really one of the big problems. It was probably now, I'd say, about 18 months ago or so. It was at one of these events around town in DC where you go, and it's either off the record or Chatham House Rules. And one of the Federal Circuit judges was talking, and it became clear that that particular judge did not agree with what we in the audience were saying, is that there was a per se rule against the patenting of medical diagnostics. And now everybody understands that, and the Federal Circuit understands it now. But it seems to me that a lot of times the Federal Circuit, the judges, they get myopic, and that's not necessarily intended to sound as pejorative as it probably did, but they focus on the cases that are in front of them and don't take a step back and see what we've been saying in the industry for so long is that you've created a set of rules and structures and interpretations of these cases that is really not allowing innovators the ability to protect the innovation that they're working on and the innovation that we need. You know, I listen to all of this stuff about testing. Why don't we have better testing? Why isn't it more accurate? Why isn't it all over the place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And and now we know and appreciate the government seems to know we need to be testing more and we can't flip the switch or what have you. And it's like, well, at some point in time, does it shock anybody that after you've told people stop investing in medical diagnostics, we're not going to let you protect medical diagnostics, investors go invest in somewhere else, that all the people, all the best and brightest people who will otherwise be working on this problem are not working on this problem. And now we have this pandemic and they need to ramp up to change gear, and it's happening, but none of this happens in a vacuum. We need to have policies in place in order to be forward thinking. We need to be dealing with what's likely to happen, not with what just happened. And not to say that what's going on at the universities or in the pharmaceutical industry or biotech industry is wrong, because right now we are in a moment where we have to triage and we have to deal with what is happening in front of us. But for God's sake, can we please get to a point where we're setting policy that will allow us to deal better with what's coming next? Because we've been saying this, we've been reading about this in science fiction, we've been seeing about it in movies. I don't know how many of you have Netflix, but over the last several weeks, as we've all been home in quarantine, you know, look at them, go check the top 10 movies in Netflix, and it's Outbreak. It's all these pandemic movies, right? I mean, these are movies that go back 20 years, and I'm sure they were before that. And scientists have been telling us about this problem forever. My God, I'm going to get off my soapbox. That's my 2 cents. But what I'd like to do now is get all of you to give me your 2 cents. If you could get on your soapbox for a moment, if you could make sure that all the people in the audience take one thing away today, what is that one thing? And let's go again, we'll go in alphabetical order. Jeff.
Sorry, just unmuting. Yes, thank you, Gene. I would say that this panel has been very encouraging and very uplifting in describing the outpouring of public-spirited participation by so many hugely important players throughout the healthcare ecosystem in coming together to make all of this work. And I think that if all of them and all of us continue in that same spirit of public interest, then we will have established an enormously important principle in terms of the availability of collaboration and the pro-competitive and pro-public interest purposes and abilities of collaboration to come together. That will be an important precedent for, God forbid, the next time something like this happens, which we know it will, or the next time we have any other emergency that requires that same level of cooperation.
Thanks, Jeff. Oren.
I mean, I think this is a scary time. There's a lot of hope for the future. We're all in it together. Let's try to not screw it up.
Yeah, that from your lips to God's ears. Phil.
A much more compact way of saying what I said. Thanks.
Yeah. Phil, your thoughts.
I agree with both comments, but let's remember when we get through this emergency, which we will, that the patent system and investment in innovation done when it's not an emergency is what is going to give us the best foundation to win the next one. And this is an opportunity to remind everybody that as good as we are now, we could have been better had we had stronger and more uniform incentives. And we need to be stronger because the next one may not have a lethality of 1%. It may have a lethality of 25%. And we'd better be ready with better weapons than we've got right now when that happens.
Agreed completely. David, your final thoughts.
Yeah, Gene, I'll be more pointed and say that with the current state of patent eligibility in the US, don't plan on significant forward-looking investment in diagnostics. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and that is a real tragedy of what's been going on, and we're living that tragedy out daily, it seems like. And let me just point out what should be obvious to everybody. The reason that matters so much is not only can we know who has what right now, but if you can't diagnose it, you can't treat it. You know, we're cutting off the medical devices and the drugs and the therapies as well, which is frustrating. Gaby, your final thoughts.
My final thoughts are, we're mired in this current pandemic. Let's look forward now. Let's envision that we got out of this pandemic. Let's look forward and think about vaccine supplies in general, and specifically childhood vaccinations. And I'm thinking about the 2001-2002 shortage of 8 of the 11 routine childhood vaccines. And the fact that most of them are not manufactured in the US. They're manufactured in Europe or in China. We need to manufacture some of these ourselves. And I think with the proper incentives that have been discussed already, we should be able to do that.
Yeah, that would be a very good event. Judge Michelle, your final thoughts, please.
Well, I think that the breadth and diversity of the people participating in this webinar gives me great hope that this kind of broader coalition can continue into the future. And if it does and recruits other allies and supporters, I think administrations, whether a new one or the current one, and the courts and the Congress actually can be persuaded to do the right thing, and we could be in a much better place over the course of the next few years. So we need to stay together. As Benjamin Franklin mentioned to the Continental Congress, if we don't hang together, we'll probably hang separately.
Yeah. I think we've lost Jim from Pharma. So we'll just proceed to you, Rob, your final thoughts. And I know you gave Oren credit for starting this, but really I think this is an issue that you've been pounding on in your focus newsletter and in all your speaking engagements for some time. So it's probably quite appropriate that we give you the final word here today.
IP professionals have a unique position in solving this problem. We need the leadership that Oren and others, Chief Judge Michelle and Phil and Dave and everyone else on this panel, and everyone that's listening to this, we need your leadership now. We need to understand that many of our companies are in lockdown. This is a global issue. This is not a US issue. And the leadership needs to come from us. And when I saw Oren's LinkedIn post, it just brought tears to my eyes, because I know people in New York who are dying, and I could not believe that our research institutions, many research institutions, had stepped up to the plate spontaneously to do this. We have to encourage everything that we can possibly do now and in the future, and we just cannot back off one bit. So, Gene, thank you for the leadership in putting this together, and thank you for assembling this on such short order. We really need to salute you and IP Watchdog.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But you guys are the ones who are doing the hard work. I'm an electrical engineer. I can contribute to software, but you guys are the ones that are on the front lines talking about this issue all the time. And I really appreciate you coming out in force and being here for everybody. And I really appreciate all of those who joined us online today and all the registrants. It's a topic that matters to all of us, obviously. And we're going to continue to pursue this and other topics. So hopefully you'll be able to join us again in the future. And I want to give one final shout out to our sponsor, to Patent Site, because without the sponsors doing this and putting the time and energy into it from our perspective and pulling it off, and it's just not possible. So if you really have any kind of portfolio needs, you need to do some research and to see what's really going on in your portfolio or your competitor's portfolio or landscaping or what have you. Take a look at Patent Site. I think you're going to be surprised at the amount of information you can get very quickly. And I really want to thank them and LexisNexis for being such great sponsors over the years. So the conversation will no doubt continue. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane in your lockdown wherever you may be. And we look forward to seeing you in person at some point once this lets up. But until then, you all be well, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Gene.
Thanks, Gene.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.